Sorry about that. Good morning. Hi. Wow, 3 years, hasn't it? Who's raise your hand if this is your first in-person conference since COVID. That's more than I expected. I feel unduly lucky. Um, Nice seeing you. It's amazing. Thank you, GeeCon team, for putting this together. We've missed you all. We've missed everything to do with this conference, really. Um, Before I get started, don't forget that we have Slido for questions. And again, before we get started, I will start with full disclosure. This is probably the least technical talk I've ever written or presented. It's going to be very touchy-feely. It's going to be, there's not going to be a line of code here. So if that sort of thing bugs you, I fully understand. Please don't hesitate to come punch me in the face after. I know Anjay will. Right, so the subject for today is culture. Now, I don't know if you've noticed, but especially over the last 5 to 10 years, the subject of culture has been buzzing. Conferences have talks about culture. We have slide decks about culture. Everyone is talking about culture all the time, arguably for good reasons. But just to put things in perspective, being somewhat lucky, I actually did get to go to a few in-person conferences since COVID. Well, it never ended really, but since it kind of went on hiatus. So the last three conferences I've been to had some culture talks, and this is, I was curious about how many talks at each conference. I wanted to see is this really a thing? Well, it turns out it is, because discounting workshops, I looked at build stuff in Lithuania, and 1 in 4 talks have been about culture. Was not a technical talk per se, it's more about how to handle leadership and DevOps and all of these nice touchy-feely things. NDC in Porto, which just wrapped up a couple of weeks ago, happened to have exactly the same percentage. Don't ask me how that happened. And then there's DevOps Days in Israel, which, as you might guess, being a DevOps conference, tends to have more culture talks. I didn't really expect 1 in every 2 talks to be about culture. So clearly, culture is very important to us as an industry. Right? The way we do business, the way we actually develop the products that we do, super important to all of us. But what is, I feel, really lacking from the conversation is less about what makes good culture and more about how to arrive at a corporate culture that is good. How do you consciously and deliberately build the culture of your organization? And I think that question is somewhat problematic because it inherently includes a contradiction in terms. And right now, by the way, I can't see any of you, so you can pull faces at me, it's fine. Culture is what is, not what we want the company to be. Culture is what you actually have in your company right now. It's the way you do business, the way you make decisions, the way you interact with your customers, the way you interact with your teammates. It is what is. And I think Netflix nailed it with the original Reed Hastings slide deck back from, 2009, I think. So that's pretty old at this point. The real company values are best expressed by how you hire people, how you fire people, and how you promote people. And I think that very much holds true today. Culture is an effect. Culture is not a cause. Culture is not the thing that determines how your company behaves. It is the result of those things. And if it's an effect, it behooves us to question an effect of what? What determines culture? So really, I believe, and all of this, it does work. All of this is my opinion, just to be clear, right? But in my kind of analysis, there's really only 2 things that determine culture. The first is judgment. And by judgment, I mean the people in your company make judgment calls all the time, right? You have a decision to make, whether it's in the small or in the large. How do you make that decision? Did you make the right decision? How did you arrive at that decision? What is the reasoning that brought you from having to make a decision to actually making it in a coherent and hopefully well thought out way? The other thing is kind of often ignored, but I mean, if these are the results, right, the results of the decisions you make, the other thing is how reliably do you make those decisions? Are you consistent? Do the decisions you make sense? Are they consistent with other decisions you've taken in the past? Are they consistent with your espoused company values? Right? Every one of us has in our company probably a document stating, you know, this is our mission, these are the values we believe in, these are the things we hold dear to our heart. You can have the best decisions in the world, but if the process leading up to these decisions is bad, by which I mean if the decisions you make are not consistent with your family values, right? Your company values, or if you make the right decisions for the right reasons, but the people in the company and your customers and everyone who's a stakeholder is just in the dark, they don't have a clue what's going on, they don't know how you arrived at the decision, you have a problem, and you have a culture problem. So the first kind of distillation, in my opinion, of what good culture is that a healthy culture has to be purposeful, by which I mean it has to drive towards a particular purpose, it has to be deliberate in what it says, but it also has to be consistent. These are the two important elements of a healthy culture. Let's look at it by way of a counterexample. How do we fail miserably at building a company culture? And what we'll do is we'll take a look at the corporate value statement of a very large corporation that all of you know, and I may or may not name names later. Their culture document and values document lists these 10 company values, right? And this is probably very familiar to all of you because literally every company has some version of this, often with an overlap, right? Often a subset of these is what you actually have on your corporate value statement documents. You have things like integrity and mutual respect and teamwork and innovation, customer satisfaction. All of these things are values that the company holds dear, that the company finds important. And if the organization finds them important, then typically what that would mean is people are judged by these criteria, right? The decisions you make as an employee will lead to you getting fired or promoted or given a bonus based on how they measure up to these value statements. Now, this is a problem. This is a real problem because of two particular deficiencies in this way of doing things. One is it's incredibly vague. So if we take communication as a value, for instance, I mean, in the company's defense, they actually added a little bit of context to make it slightly less vague. So what they say is we share knowledge effectively with one another. That is what the corporate value statement says about what communication means. Now, this is subjective. I mean, what does effectively mean? How do you measure that? Does it, like, should you even measure that? And it's aspirational, it's not actionable, right? If I tell you that I want you to share knowledge with your peers, everyone goes, oh yeah, sure, knowledge sharing, very important. And then they end up with like a SharePoint installation somewhere that no one uses, or Confluence, or whatever tool you use to dump knowledge that no one ever reads into. So that doesn't really help. But even worse, these values can very easily conflict. So probably every single one of you had been, I know I have, oftentimes have perpetrated those arguments, have been in an argument where there are two solutions to a particular problem. One of them is debatably of higher quality, and the argument itself is the problem. It's not even the solution space, it's not what you're trying to accomplish that matters, it ends up being the argument that matters. Why? Because these two values can and often are in conflict. So obviously corporate value propositions, right? What are our corporate values is not sufficient. It's not a stupid discussion to have. It's a worthwhile discussion to have because you learn about your company, your peers, yourself as you're having that discussion. But it doesn't bring you any closer to having a good corporate culture. And that's for two reasons. It's vague. And vague is the opposite of purposeful. If you say, if you're trying to be purposeful in the way you build your corporate culture, being vague does not lead you there, does not get you there. Saying we want to communicate effectively doesn't mean anything. And saying something that is devoid of meaning is worse than not saying anything at all. And ambiguity, if you leave your corporate value statement or whatever it is, whatever tool you use, ambiguous, that leaves room for inconsistency. You're gonna get those arguments regardless because you haven't figured out what matters to you really. This is where I name names, both for purposes of giving credit where credit is due, but also hopefully none of you have managed to figure out that those value statements are actually oracles. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things we can say about Oracle. I'm not sure things like integrity, mutual respect, teamwork, communication, innovation, customer satisfaction, quality, fairness, compliance, or ethics is any of them. But, you know, that's up to you to judge. In our manager's arsenal, like when a manager or when anyone really in a company is setting up to build the culture, to define the culture of the company, we have a bunch of tools that we tend to use. And these are them, basically. There are other tools at play, but these are the four most common tools that companies employ to create or to define their respective culture. We have mission statements, corporate values, HR, and middle management, middle to lower management. And let's take a few seconds and look at each of these in turn. Mission statements. Mission statements, unlike a lot of people, I'm as cynical as the next person, but I actually sometimes find mission statements to be useful, right? Because they tell you what the company really puts front and center. Problem is, they're usually a statement of what the company does, or ideally why the company does what it does. It never tells you how. It's not actionable. So these are not tools that are really, really particularly useful for deriving understanding of how to do your day-to-day work in a way that's consistent with the company values. Problem number two, they're often super ridiculous. So just by way of one example, here's an example from a company that is actually considered to be a very good company in that respect. Like they have a very vivacious culture. Their employees tend to rate it very highly on the satisfaction scale. They have happy customers. But look at this. At company name, our purpose is simple: to live and deliver wow. Wow. I have no idea what that means. If you have any clue what that's supposed to mean, you're a better person than I, right? So corporate mission statements are obviously not very functional tools for this purpose. Then we have corporate values, which we just discussed, right? Corporate values are aspirational. They're not actionable. If you say, I want to have good communication, that's an aspiration. That's not something your employees can actually leverage to generate the culture wherein communication is key. Also, saying aspirational might be a little bit too generous. I would say it's mostly wishful thinking, actually, and not actionable, and ambiguous to boot. So obviously, a corporate value statement is not the tool for the job. Then we have the human resources department, and this is where it gets a little bit more gnarly. The HR department typically is considered to be a very important partner in setting the company culture, in anything to do with culture or employees or the touchy-feely, fuzzy human elements of a corporation. But they're also not a particularly good tool for defining and building and dealing with the company culture. And the cynical take, right, the bearded, male, older guy, fuckhead take on why that is because it's not their job. Fundamentally, the human resources department at any given company represents organizational interest. Their job is not to build a healthy corporate culture. Their job is to represent the organization in case there are conflicts arising from human relationships, including in conflict situations. In fact, especially in conflict situations. The HR department, whenever there's a conflict, and especially if you are part of that conflict, the cynical, again, take is you should not consider the HR department in any organization to be your friend because it is not their job. Their job is to make sure the organization is secure against anything to do with human conflict within that organization, right? It's got nothing to do with culture. Now that's the cynical take, and I do somewhat subscribe to that opinion, but there's also a much more practical take about why it is that they can't help you build your corporate culture. And the reality is it can't be their job. They can't really be beneficial to you in that way because they have very limited intersection to the day-to-day, with the day-to-day life of an employee in the trenches, especially engineers, right? As an engineer, software engineer on a team, or as a team lead on a team, your interaction with the HR department is limited to the point of non-existent, right? There's just not enough overlap there. And culture isn't what you want, it's what is. So culture is the culmination of everything that happens on a day-by-day basis within the organization. If the HR department isn't constantly in there being part of that decision-making process that happens every day in every part of the organization, and they can't be, then there's a very, very low bar as to what they can actually achieve with respect to culture. So it can't be their job. And then we have middle management. The cynical take, again, is that it's not their job, right? Middle management, and by that I mean group leads, VPs, low-level managers, depending on kind of the size and the structure of your company, they're actually not incentivized to build corporate culture. They're incentivized to facilitate the process. Their job is fundamentally not to build the culture, is to make sure that the job gets done. Their job is to make sure that execution happens in a way where the company makes money and doesn't lose it. More importantly, though, I think for most middle managers, and especially team leads in an engineering profession, the practical take is they really would probably want to be part of that process. They really probably would want to be able to make beneficial changes to the company culture and support their employees, etc. But they really can't, because especially as a manager, especially compared to the sort of corporate pressure that you experience as an engineer, managers tend to be beholden to the company line. Managers tend to be in a position where they are part of the structure of the company that guarantees the process actually happens, right? That is their job, which means essentially any given manager typically has very limited autonomy just to make decisions sort of in their corner of the organization, and they have no authority to actually affect other parts of the organization. And any cultural change, any mechanism you want to put in place to improve the culture will generally cross that line, will generally involve more than one team, one sub-organization. With limited autonomy and limited authority, which is what ironically most managers have, and it's a lot more limited than what we as engineers tend to have, they just can't really help, right? They don't have the authority and they're not incentivized to actually make those changes. So if these are the tools we have, we're in a bit of a pickle because all of these tools are woefully inadequate to have any meaningful, substantive difference on your company culture. Which begs the question, what do we do about it, right? How do we deliberately and consciously and thoughtfully build and improve our company culture, despite the fact that all of the tools we have today just aren't really helpful? And I'm of the opinion that the way to make progress is to go, back to first principles. The way to make progress is, as usual, as with everything we do, is to first ask, what is it we're trying to accomplish? And then figure out how to best accomplish it, and then execute on that decision. So, I'm of the opinion that culture basically revolves around this quandary. You have an employee, right? Presumably you have many employees, maybe you are one. But for any employee within the organization, they have to make a lot of decisions almost on a day-by-day basis, right? There's a lot of decisions to be made. When an employee makes a decision, we categorically want that decision to be for the good of the company, right? Which is an expression kind of everyone uses, not necessarily advisedly, right? But that is kind of what we want, right? We want the decision, whatever it is, to be in line with the company values, to be useful to the company, to be supportive of the company's customers, and to, contribute to the company's bottom line. That's what for the good of the company means. How do we accomplish that? Let's first take a look at what's at stake, right? What can we improve or destroy if we make the right or wrong set of decisions? So really we have three things that are at stake. We have effectiveness, which is the decisions you actually make as an employee and as an organization. Are they the right decisions? Are they smart? Are they going to be contributing to that bottom line? Then we have efficiency. How quickly do you make those decisions? Because some decisions can be very good, but take way too long and to the point where their effect is minimized or even diminished entirely. And then there's security, right? That's the third thing you want to accomplish. And I don't mean security in the technical security sense. I mean security in the everyone is feeling secure. Everyone is feeling safe. And that comes in both directions. The employees need to feel safe and secure that the company has their back, that the company has authorized them to make that decision, and whatever decision they make, it's either going to be the right one or the wrong one, but there's safety in making that decision. If it's the right one, they're going to be rewarded. If it's the wrong one, there's going to be a tough conversation, but no one is going to lose their job just by virtue of making a bad judgment. On the other hand of the coin, of course, we have the company itself that needs to feel secure in delegating those decisions to employees, right? The reasons why companies often fail to delegate is because there's too much at stake, or there are legal and compliance reasons. We need to take all of that into account. In order to have these kind of three attributes in a positive direction, there's a few requirements, a few things that need to hold true. In order to get effectiveness, what we want is we want the employees to have a good, really internalized understanding of the company's stated as well as unstated goals. Right? The only way for the decision to be a good one is for the decision to be in line with what the corporate structure kind of wants. In terms of efficiency, no magic bullets. The only way to get efficiency is to get autonomy, and we know that, right? That's not news. The only way in which the company moves forward quickly is for those decisions to be made with as little human synchronization as possible. And then with respect to security, it's all about trust, right? We want the employees to have trust in the organization, otherwise they're not going to be able to make good judgment calls effectively because they're afraid of the end result. And we need the company to have trust in the employee, otherwise, obviously, the company will not feel safe delegating those decisions. So what we have is not an answer, but we have an initial framework in which to actually start making progress. And in order to continue making progress, there are a couple of axioms that I want to share with you that will hold for the rest of this talk. Axiom number one, people want to make good decisions. Okay? We will not be talking about Byzantine organizational faults and bad actors in the organization. We're going to assume that everyone involved is competent and wants to make the right decision for the good of the company, the good of the other employees, the good of their stock options, whatever it is. Axiom number two, generally speaking, until you have a conflict of interest, until as an employee I feel personally disenfranchised by any action that the company wants to take, I'm perfectly happy with the company line. Until, until the point at which any decision made will harm me personally, whether it's because I have to wake up in the middle of the night or because I have to have an uncomfortable conversation with someone, whatever it is, until that happens, I and probably most every employee in most every company are pretty happy with the way things are. So with these two axioms in mind, we really have two goals. The first goal in order to get better decision making, in order to get better everyday activity of everyone within the organization, which is what culture is. We want to empower our employees to discern what good means as far as the company is concerned. Right? For every decision, if I have to make a decision and I have several options and I'm trying to pick between them, I need to have some idea of what the organization around me perceives as a good decision. Right? If I make if I make a decision that's detrimental to the company, that is not in line with what the company wants to accomplish, and I don't know that ahead of time, that is a pretty big problem. So we want to give everyone the tools to actually understand and actually reason about what the company perceives as good. And the second thing we want to do is we want to minimize the risk of conflict. We want to minimize the risk of the company asking an employee to do something or to make a decision that is in direct conflict of interest to whatever it is that they're doing. So if I ask someone, hey, I need you to work, I need you to work on Saturday and Sunday because we have a customer demo coming up, that is not necessarily an intrinsic conflict of interest, but it very easily could be. So determining that line and towing that line is super important. The way you accomplish these two things, that is to say, the way you teach your employees what you, the organization, perceive as good, and the way you minimize that risk of conflict, is by asking really, really, really hard questions constantly. We as an organization, we as a group of people within an organization have to constantly ask ourselves, what ifs? What can happen? What are the things that we value? What would we expect an employee to do in any given set of circumstances? So let's take a look at two examples, and I flat out guarantee you've run into these examples before. This is Magda. Magda is a brilliant engineer. She's really good at her job. She really wants the customers to be happy. She's the kind of employee you want on your team right now. She's conscientious. She comes to work on time. She tries her best to come up with good solutions. And generally speaking, she's just very competent. Magda also hates waking up in the middle of the night while on call, or not on call, as the case may be. Unfortunately for us, Magda has woken up 3 times tonight because some service somewhere failed, and it's the same service she's been raising red flags about for weeks and months. Right? Magda has been coming into meetings for the last month or 2 months and has been noting that a particular service does not meet the quality bar or has some scalability concerns or whatever it is. She's been raising red flags. Those red flags had been either disregarded or deprioritized, and she'd woken up 3 times just tonight as a result of that. Magda has a bit of a dilemma. She can't really affect change. Right? She can't decide that the problems that she's been flagging are more important than anything else that's happening in the company. She doesn't own the backlog, right? She can't just decide to reprioritize things because the backlog may be owned by the product manager in the team, it may be owned by another team. Whomever it is that owns the backlog, it's not Magda. So she can't really make any decision that changes the status quo, and she must implicitly respect someone else's judgment. On the other hand, it is her problem. She's the one waking up in the middle of the night. She's the one raising flags and being ignored, and then having to suck it up and wake up in the middle of the night to deal with a problem not of her making. Right? So she has a real problem. Why is she so uneasy? Well, as we said before, she is personally disenfranchised, right? Her personal well-being is at stake here. She has to wake up in the middle of the night, and she knows it's avoidable. But fairness, as with the previous Oracle example, because Oracle is known to be fair, fairness is a company value. And if it's a company value, then how did we arrive at the situation that is so unfair to Magda? We have a conflict. We have 2 conflicting values that we never determined any relationship, like 2 values that we never defined a relationship between, and that are now in conflict. So what can Magda do? Right? She really has one of three options. Option one is to get with a program and be fine with it, right? If she can accept the situation willingly, then that's the ideal outcome. Everyone is happy, right? If Magda has, some kind of internal deliberation and ends up saying, this actually is the right decision, right? I can get behind that decision, then we have no problem. Or she can accept the situation unwillingly, i.e., she can be told by her boss or manager or VP, whoever it is, that, hey, it is what it is, you're just gonna have to suck it, which leads to seething resentment on Magda's part. Or she can escalate, right? She can approach her, not necessarily her immediate superior, because presumably that's the person in the room when she was raising all those red flags. She could approach the VP and say, hey, look, we have a real problem here. What are we gonna do about it? And if that happens, the VP really has the same problem as Magda does, because we have those two conflicting values. So the way out of this mess, by my reckoning, again, is asking hard questions. So let's play a game of what if. What if we reprioritize the backlog? What if we take Magda's opinion and run with it? Right? The backlog does not represent what we need. We need to shuffle things around and figure out a solution to this problem that is plaguing Magda. Well, there's a few ramifications to that. There's going to be fewer wake-up calls because the problem will get solved, hopefully. Magda will feel very vindicated, right? I had a problem, I raised it, I escalated it to my VP, things got done, right? That is a good feeling. That is a feeling of satisfaction. However, promises to clients may slip, right? Because if you reprioritize the backlog, if you take this one bug and you put it ahead of a customer feature, you may miss deadlines. You may miss promises you've made to customers. So those are ramifications, right? However, if this is acceptable, right? If we look at the set of results and go, yeah, you know what? That makes sense. We want to do that. Why didn't we do it in the first place? Why did we have to end up in a situation where Magda is feeling so disenfranchised and our customers end up not getting their product on time, right? We've lost on both counts. And that is an important question to ask, right? What did we as an organization miss that would have prevented this from becoming kind of a conflict in the first place? Option two, what if we stay on course? Right? What if we keep the backlog prioritized the way it is and the issue that is plaguing Magda does not get fixed anytime soon? Well, again, we have certain ramifications. Clients will maybe be happy, hopefully, because we provided them with the service that we promised in the time frame that we promised. That is a good thing. The on-call, the engineer on-call will continue waking up because the problem isn't going away. The problem is there, right? And realistically, at that point, Magda as an engineer might be on her way out of the company because feeling disenfranchised and being told to suck it is never a good experience. Whenever that happens, there is a certain very limited budget of those that the company can wield, and once that budget is expanded, people are going to be on their way out because of the frustration. But once again, if this is an acceptable set of results, then how did we arrive at this point? If this is known, right? If we as an organization state that the backlog is the way it is because of good reasons and we want to stay the course, right? If we have the set of corporate values that lead us to making this decision, then why is, how do we get to the point where Magda is not with the program to begin with? How do we get to the point where Magda feels disenfranchised, right? What is it about the way that we do business that made Magda not realize that, well, we can't reprioritize the backlog because that would mean we slip customer promises, right? We lose potential customers. I would argue that in this case, and this is a very, very common scenario, unfortunately, what happens is that we have these two corporate values that we've elucidated, right? We have them on our corporate value statement, but we never actually stop to think what happens when these two things come in conflict. Which is more important? Is customer satisfaction more important than the corporate value of fairness, as in this case is experienced by Magda as being disenfranchised, as being personally affected, right? Is that the decision we make? Is that what we value more? Or maybe the other way around. Maybe we say, look, we're a business, we want happy customers, but we also want happy teammates. So we actually will prioritize the, shall we say, the sanity of our on-call engineers above customer satisfaction. Ideally, you want to have both. Ideally, you want to not miss promises to customers, but also you want your teammates to be happy. Realistically, though, when these two values come into conflict, you're going to end up having to make a determination. You're going to need to decide which one is more important to you as a company. And the sooner you do that, the better. If we were to have this conversation right out the gate, if the results of this conversation were enshrined in the corporate value statement, then Magda would not be feeling disenfranchised, because either she would not be working at the company in the first place, because if you as an engineer are interviewing at a company, you tend to have those conversations, right? Not in those words, but you want to find out what the company values, what the company cares about, how they do on-call, how they make technical choices, how they solve conflicts within the teams. Whatever methodology you use to arrive at an understanding of an organization, the more well-defined the company culture is, the more well-defined their belief system is, the easier it is. So if Magda is, for instance, as a lot of us had been, maybe she has a toddler at home, she can't really afford to not sleep because she's not going to be able to catch up on that sleep the next day, which is a situation I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. She's not going to want to work at a company where her well-being is not as important as a promise made to a customer. And that is a value judgment. There is no right answer here. There is only what you value. There is only the things you believe in and the determinations you make as to what's more important. So that's one example. Second example might even be more common. Meet Pavel. He's also a brilliant engineer, passionate to a fault. When there's a technical argument going on in a meeting room somewhere, Pavel is there. And I'm probably butchering his name, and I apologize, Polish is a hard language. Whenever there's an argument, he's there, right? He's very argumentative, but because he cares, right? And he makes good points. And that is a problem, because Pavel, in this case, is the dilemma. Pavel is there and arguing in that room for a better outcome. But the actual fact of having that argument will inevitably lead to Pavel being sort of classified as a brilliant jerk. His teammates may or may not be accepting of that. We'll get to that in a minute. But the bottom line is, if Pavel is labeled as a brilliant jerk and people don't want to pay attention to what Pavel has to say by virtue of being an argumentative jerk, quality will suffer, right? If you disregard what the engineer in the room has to say by virtue of that engineer being unpleasant, that doesn't change the truth or untruth of what was being said, right? So if Pavel has a point, quality will suffer, despite the fact that he's arguing for a better outcome. And we need to find a way out of this conundrum again. So let's play another game of what if. What if we let Pavel have his way? What if we let Pavel win the argument? Well, there are, once again, ramifications. Quality probably will improve, right? Assuming, again, going back to our original axioms, let's assume the best of Pavel, right? Pavel is not arguing because he's an argumentative asshole. Pavel is arguing because he cares and because he sees a legitimate problem and wants to avert that problem or just have a better solution in place. So if we let him have his way, presumably quality will improve, but we will end up with resentment and negative impact on the rest of the team, right? We will have productivity loss because people that are not happy kind of don't really want to work. We're going to have employees going out the door because they don't want to work with a brilliant jerk. Those are the ramifications. And if they're acceptable to us, why did we need to have the argument in the first place, right? If we believe in quality so much, if we have quality as kind of one of our corporate value statements, and we believe in it, then why was there an argument to begin with, right? Why did we not preemptively assume that, okay, well, quality is a corporate value, so obviously we need to strive towards it. There doesn't need to be an argument if one solution is clearly superior to the other. On the other hand, what if we do what most companies do and say adieu to Pavel? It's like, Pavel, you're a dickhead, you're fired. Okay, what's going to happen? Well, team cohesion will improve. If you have someone who's a problematic actor within the company and you get rid of him, then yes, everyone else is going to be happier for it. However, quality will continue degrading because now the one person in the room with a dissenting opinion, the one person in the room with a diversity of opinions, if you will, right? An opinion that's not what everyone else in the room thinks and can back it up with a valid technical argument will not be in the room anymore. And that means that everyone else who's had dissenting opinions will also learn to shut up and just go with the flow, go with what the group wants, irrespective of the end result. And that is a choice a lot of organizations consciously or unconsciously make. Now, if this is an acceptable choice, why did we have quality as a corporate value in the first place? Why did we put it front and center? Why do we tell ourselves the lie that we want the highest quality stuff, right? That we will put the money where needed to get higher quality, if when push comes to shove, we deprioritize quality for some other potential value. A different way of considering this dilemma is asking the questions. When there's a meeting, and when you conclude that meeting, when everyone leaves the room, what is more important? That you have the best outcome from that meeting, that the result of the meeting is optimal for the company, its customers, its whatever, or that everyone leaves the room chill and happy? Ideally, you want both, right? Ideally, you want to have the best possible outcome without having arguments that lead to people being unhappy. Realistically, that's not always an option, and you must decide. And the sooner you figure it out, the better. Which leads me to the main point. Oops. There are no right answers, only opinions. Okay, this is not a technical argument. This is a touchy-feely, what do you believe in thing, right? Whatever you choose as a company, as an employee, as a person, as a group, is going to be valid for you. It's not going to be valid for the person next door or the company next door or the company that's 10 times the size or a company that's 1/10 the size, right? It is a decision that's valid for you. And the only way to really get to the point where you know what you value, your employees know what you value, your employees are behind you, they back you up on the things that you value, and vice versa, is to ask hard questions and really find out what you believe in. And that is your ethos. If you don't struggle to pit your values against one another, if you don't posit the unlikely but really very likely scenarios where the things you say you believe in come into conflict and you figure out which of them is more important, if you don't ask the hard questions, right? If I have someone on my team who is constantly argumentative but also constantly has a good point and also constantly making it impossible for the rest of the team to work, as is the case with Pavel, you're not going to win. You're not going to win anything, right? You're not going to know ahead of time that, no, this is a real problem. We need to either, fix it, work with Pavel to improve his, the way he is on the team, or we need to get rid of him, Or on the other hand, you're not gonna ahead of time be able to come to the rest of the team and go, look, I know Pavel's a bit of a dick, but he's got a fair point. You know, if we do what we said we will do, he poked a hole in the plan, right? The plan is not gonna be a good one. The product is gonna fail, right? You need to have some notion of how you're gonna be addressing those things ahead of time. And really the only way to do that is to ask really hard questions, pit your corporate values against one another constantly and deliberately and consciously. So, in summary, culture tells you what you already did. Culture is what is. It's how you got to where you are. It's not where you're gonna go next. That's what ethos tells you. If you struggle to put together a more coherent, a more in-depth value statement, and you ask those questions, and you have answers, and you know what you believe in, you have a chance of actually building up towards a different culture. If you ask hard questions and you refine and you iterate, and don't be afraid, by the way, of figuring out that, okay, well, our values have changed. We now need to make new determinations. We need to re-ask those questions and change our ethos. That's also fine. But that is the only way you make progress. That is the only way you will today have any idea how to get to the point where in a year your company is more customer-centric or more pleasant to the teammates or has a better DevOps culture, whatever the hell that means. Like, ethos begets culture. If you figure out what you believe in and you wield it with pride and you don't lie to yourself or to others about it, right? There are no right answers. Just figure out what answer fits you. And then list it and be honest about it and be proud of it, because that is who you aspire to be. And if you are consistent and thoughtful and purposeful about it, then within a certain span of time, that will become your culture. And that's really it. What do you believe in? What do you care about? Find out, figure it out, iterate on it, and be happy with it. And now we apparently have a couple of questions. How about doing both? Telling Pavel to reduce his quality standard and telling the team to pull to Pavel's level. That is aspirational but not realistic for two reasons. One is you probably hired Pavel either not talking about quality at all or promising the world. It's like, yes, we care about culture, we care about quality, quality is our most important thing. And that is how Pavel came to be at your company. You can't lower the bar at that point because that's just not going to work, right? Pavel already expects a certain quality bar because that's what you sold him. On the other hand, you also can't really pull everyone up to Pavel's level because they don't share the ethos, right? Pavel, presumably, right, is one of those old school engineers that cares more about the result than teamwork and feelings. God knows I am one, so I can relate. That's an ethos. That's not something that can change. And if Pavel's personal ethos is in conflict with the company ethos, then that's not really a problem you can solve. You need to either change the company ethos or change the company makeup. In other words, get rid of Pavel. Those are your only real options. The primary axiom is that everyone in a company is competent and able to come to the right decisions, right? Yes. The assumption, I mean, it's not worth talking about bad actors. If you have people that came into the meeting to be assholes, then you're screwed anyway. If you have people coming into the meeting and are woefully incompetent, it doesn't matter what you want to happen, you're not gonna come out with a result that exudes quality, right? It is what it is. So yes, that is an assumption in this talk. And I believe that is the last question we have. So assuming there aren't any others, just to repeat, find out what you believe in. Have those conversations, pit your values against one another. Don't be afraid of positing hard scenarios. Play what if, as if you were a kid. Just play what if, because that will teach you more about how your company actually wants to do business and how your employees actually want to work within the company than anything else you might do. certainly more so than a corporate mission statement or value statement or any of those things. And with that, have an amazing conference. It is so good to see you again after 3 years. I mean, not see you, because it's dark, but I will be around to hash this out if anyone wants to. Have a great conference, and thank you for coming. Cheers.